A very good morning to one and all present today for the IVDR Celebration Week, where today we have Nicola Wall from Afortiori Development and Greer Deal from Global Regulatory Services, and we are going to talk about what is a clinical performance study and why do you need it. Hello, Nicola. Hello, Greer. I hope you are doing well this morning.
Yep, thank you, Jay.
Well, thanks, Jay.
Yes, and that's interesting. And not to forget, the IVDR Celebration Week is brought to you by Media and powered by Global Regulatory Services Limited, and in association with our resource partners, which includes Galway Chamber, Middlink Midlands, Afortiori Development, Xenon Health Solutions, GS1 Ireland, Health and Innovation Hub Ireland, Embassy of India, Dublin, Ireland. And together with all the resource partners and all the experts, we want to make sure you are #IVDR ready. So without doing any more delay into this session, I would like to invite Nicola to first introduce herself and the company and what all services does Afortiori Development provide.
Sure, thanks, Jay. So my name is Nicola Wall, and I have worked in clinical research for a long time, over 20 years, shall we say. And I have worked in all therapeutic areas across devices, drugs, and diagnostics, and essentially formed Afortiori Development as a result of wanting to run better, more efficient research, particularly for small and emerging companies, to be able to provide them with the services that they really need. So, some strategic aspects of clinical development, but most importantly, the ability to help them to design and run the most appropriate clinical study for their products. So we're based between Ireland and the UK, but we run studies globally for clients.
That's interesting. Thank you so much, Nicola. And for people who have tuned in with us since day one, they definitely know who Greer Deal is. But I will still give her an opportunity to talk about herself and the companies.
Okay, thank you very much, Jay. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So, yes, I'm Greer Deal, co-founder of Global Regulatory Services and Media. And GRS, the parent company, is based in the UK. Has a network of specialists all around the world so that we can provide in-country expertise as well as the technical regulatory and quality compliance know-how. And that is across the whole of the life sciences. And then a few years ago, we actually spun out Media, which is based in the lovely city of Galway in Ireland, which means that we have a footprint in Europe as well as in Great Britain. And that is a regulatory affairs and quality compliance consultancy focusing on everything to do with medtech, as well as the borderline products with fitness, wellness to medical devices and your combo drug device products as well. And through Media, we're able to offer the 24/7 roles of EU authorized representative, person responsible for regulatory compliance, which is new to this regulation, as well as EU clinical trial legal rep, amongst other things. So thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you so much, Greer, and thank you so much, Nicola. And this is for the audiences. Dear audience, if you are watching us and if you have any questions that you have during the session, feel free to use the comment box on all social platforms. The comment section is constantly being monitored, and I would like to happily take up your questions and make sure our experts give you the answer during the session. But if you think that there are some questions that you would like a follow-up on, then feel free to drop on an email at mdd@mddltd.com. And our experts and resource partners will be happy to answer all your queries related to in vitro diagnostics and the regulation that's going to come in soon. Yes, so today's session, we are going to focus more on a clinical performance study and why do you need it. But before we move there, Greer, I would like to know more about what is performance evaluation and is it mandatory?
Okay, so the first thing to be clear on, and this is a distinction between the medical device regulation and the IVD regulation. And when you're talking about a medical device, we talk about clinical evaluation. When you're talking about diagnostics, it's performance evaluation. So you're literally evaluating the performance of the diagnostic in its setting. Just to answer your second part of that question, is it mandatory? Absolutely, yes. And I'll explain why in a bit. But going back to what is a performance evaluation, it's basically it must be an evaluation of the performance data, how the diagnostic performs, and it must be objective. So you're actually looking at both favourable and unfavourable data. And the depth and extent of the evaluation is proportionate and appropriate to the diagnostic itself. And what I mean by that is you're considering what are the risks involved with the diagnostic, what is its risk classification. So under the IVDR, we have the new risk classification groups of A up to D, with A being the minimal risk and D being the highest risk. You're looking obviously at the performance, and the intended use and its purpose is critical for setting the clinical evidence which is needed. So, and then the performance evaluation isn't just one thing, it's made up of a couple of areas. So you have your performance evaluation plan. So how are you going to approach the evaluation of the performance? And this isn't historical, it's how you're going to approach it today. And I'm sure Nicola is going to be talking about the strategy side of things during this session, so I'll leave that to her. But yeah, you're definitely not relying on old study protocols. So you're looking at its intended use as well today. And what is the state of the art? Now, state of the art, you may hear that bandied around quite a lot. And that basically is referring what is currently and generally accepted as good practice. And do you go above and beyond that, actually? So that is what state of the art, and notified bodies, competent authorities are always looking at state of the art. So the performance evaluation plan is the first part of one part of your performance evaluation. And then you have the performance evaluation report. And that is made up of several different aspects again. So your scientific validity report, your analytical performance report, your clinical performance report, and then finally the conclusion itself. And your performance evaluation report is actually a critical part of your technical documentation, and it will lead into the plan that you need for post-market performance follow-up. And one final note is your performance evaluation report. If you need to engage with a notified body and they're going to review your technical documentation, they're doing a general audit, quality management system, etc. If they don't see a performance evaluation report when they first arrive, or when they first start conducting the review, that review is not going to go ahead. So absolutely mandatory. This is critical to any diagnostic company.
Thank you so much, Greer, for answering that. And Nicola, what does it mean to have to run a study on your product?
So, and I think there's a couple of things that I really want to highlight for having to run a study. And actually even the use of the word study is interesting, Jay, because what we've noticed is that sometimes people get hung up on the word trial, and then they are like, well, it's not a trial, I'm running a study or I'm running a validation, but actually it's all the same thing, right? This is all about the process that you have to go through, that very clearly defined in a set of guidelines about how to gather the right evidence and data on the performance of that product. That's a clinical study. And then how you do that, again, I think has been mentioned in some of the sessions earlier this week, is very much dependent on the product, on the classification, on the regulatory requirements, but also I want to mention here your market requirements as well in terms of what your end users would be looking at from an evidence point of view, because that's also really, really important. So essentially what you do is you take all of that information, and one of the most important first steps is around making sure you have the right design. And I've heard it discussed in the terms of the word strategy as well, and it's all the same thing. It's really starting out with the right plan to gather the right amount of data on your study, because you don't want to gather too much and you don't want to gather too little, right? There's a balance and there's a process. So what you do then is you are then looking to go out into the right environment, whether that's in the community, whether that's in a hospital, whether that's in a lab, whatever it is, finding the right environment to gather that data and to gather it in a robust and scientific way. And that's it. And maybe I've condensed about 35 different other parts of that process. But really, it's that process of gathering evidence. And that's what we say to people as well. We're in the evidence business. We're in the business of helping you to gather that data and that evidence on your product.
Okay, thank you so much. And how long does it take to run the study, and how much does it cost?
But a penny for every time I had that question. Me and Greer were both in a desert island somewhere. No, I mean, it's a very important question, and I know we wanted to address it today. So, again, it's so dependent on your product, right? And what we try to explain to people, because we have this chicken and egg situation where so many companies, they need to have an idea of how much it's going to cost in order to go and fundraise and all of that stuff. But unfortunately, it is it's that dreaded question, because until we really know exactly what you need to gather, as Greer has said before, and as other folks have said earlier this week, until you know what evidence you need and how much of it you need, where you need to gather it, the types of numbers we talk about sample size, but really all that means is how many data points do you need to collect? Until you've gone through a process of clinical trial design, which is, and I can talk more about that later, but it is a really important set of steps that you have to go through in order to know that you've designed the right study for your product to meet your regulation and as well as your market needs as well. And that's what we say to people. It is really, really difficult. But I will also say what impacts your study costs is very much the location of where you run studies. We've had lots of people, talk to us about, should I run it here? Should I run it there? So, this government's going to give me more money, and again, all I would say is it depends. It really does depend. But, what we do say to people is you're in a medical product development business. So there's lots of zeros involved, but there's lots of clever ways to address that too.
So Nicola, can I just ask then, if someone comes to you and they, diagnostic company, and they're going after funding, you've mentioned that already. So, how are they going to be able to establish, what kind of figures and timelines they're looking at in order to go after the funding? Because you just said it's chicken and egg. So what would you recommend that they do in order to establish those facts?
They have to have their career. It's like you said earlier, and has been said earlier this week, they have got to have started that performance evaluation plan to understand what data they already have that can be leveraged, right? And then what are the gaps? What's needed? And you can that's all part of the clinical strategy that's been talked about this week, and absolutely rightly so. And I think, from our perspective, your specifics around your clinical trials, that's what you need to know. You need to understand your endpoints, and you need to understand where, and then you need to understand statistically. And if you make the investment in doing that and getting the answers to those questions with the right experts, then you'll have the information that you need, that you can stand behind. Because what we've also seen with clients is that, investors are a very savvy group of people. So, they know a story when they see it. And, a lot of times they'll see, well, where is, your sample size? To say nothing of what the regulators are looking for. This is just talking about, more early stage stuff. But it's having that clarity and having interrogated that whole process. Right, where are the gaps? What do we need? Are our endpoints correct? Are we going to test it in this place, this place? What is our sample size looking like? And then, how, your manufacturing timelines, all of that overlaid. Once you have a good picture of that, and there's processes to do that. There's people that have talked about that this week. There's lots of great expertise out there, and I think, as been said again earlier this week, and with yourselves, that this is a process that there's so many wonderful, talented people out there that can help, and we're all part of a community that wants to help and give companies what they need in terms of that knowledge. And trial design and this whole process is no different from that.
Yeah. Thanks. And also, I think what we were saying earlier, I mean, from a pure regulatory perspective, so many companies think of regulatory and clinical as a cost, as a necessary evil. And I'm trying to bang my drum and say, actually, no, this is an investment in your business, in your future. So this is why we put together our regulatory roadmap reports. So we benchmark where they're at, what they need to do, where they're going. It's all signposting. We identify the gaps. So it's a form of gap analysis as well. And then we advise on how to address those gaps and how they can move through the process. And part of that, obviously, on today's subject with performance evaluation, it will include that. But as something I know that Afortiori do is that you'll sit down with a client and walk them through the process. I just wondered if you could talk through that a bit.
Yeah, sure.
As an investment, because what you're doing is mitigating risk really longer term.
Exactly. And it's an education process as well, isn't it, Greer? And and as we start to engage with companies, that's one of the first things we start to ascertain is what kind of regulatory strategic advice have you had at this point in time? Is your intellectual property locked away? Because what we've also seen is that actually patent, the interplay of what's in a patent and data and claims is also it's also a really important aspect of the types of data they need to gather, but from that perspective as well. But really there is a lot here, and I don't want to say it's complicated, but it's just there's a lot of different moving parts, shall we say. So one of the things we do is we workshop that with people. So we take the time down, as we've done with yourselves, Greer, and we walk them through the process that they're going to have to go through in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months, number of years, and help them understand that what the clinical piece that is here is directly impacted by their regulatory strategy, their marketing plans, their IP plans, and what does that mean in terms of timelines. And I think that's just as valuable as people saying, well, how much is it going to cost me? And us saying, well, really sorry, we can't tell you that right now. But what I can tell you is that the more you understand why these different components are needed and that there's a cost attached to them, the more people start to really understand that process that they're going to embark on. And again, I think we're very lucky, particularly in Ireland. There's a great ecosystem of various types of supports for people to tap into. And, there's accelerator programs, there's all kinds of different things. But, for us, we have just found that there is that educational piece that companies have found really valuable, to truly understand what it is they're about to embark on.
Yes, thank you so much. And I was going through some of the questions that we have received previously, and I think this fits in for this session. Someone has asked, what is ethics approval and do you need it? Nicola, will you be able to guide this, especially when we talk about clinical requirements?
Yeah. I'll speak to that now very quickly. So what happens is there's usually a two-tier system of approval for studies. There's obviously your competent authority on a regulatory level, so the HPRA in Ireland, MHRA in the UK, etc. EMA is the pan-European body. And then you also have what are called ethics committees in various countries. In America, they're called IRBs. We call them RECs in the UK. And what they are is essentially it's a process that companies need to go through to make sure they've all the right documentation, but that they've proven that the study that they're about to run has been thought through very carefully. There's a huge set of documentation that's required, and really in I would say most cases, and of course you'd always get someone that said, well, I ran a study and I didn't do this, that, and the other. And that's fine. There's exceptions to everything. But I would tell you, in the vast majority of cases, you need your study to be approved by an ethics group, whatever country you're in. Some countries have dual process. It used to be years ago that it was a painstaking sort of stepwise process. Now, a lot of countries have done away with that, and you've got lots of wonderful centralized application systems that you can use. But at the end of the day, those committees, because ethics is about another sort of set of eyes, shall we say, on the study that you're about to run. Usually, whether diagnostics, again, there's a lot of differences between what you'd need to do depending on what your product is. But what we also say to people is, actually, when you're looking to publish and peer review, if you have ethics committee approval, it's almost like another sort of gold standard to show that you've gone through that rigorous process, to show that you've thought through everything and that an ethics committee has approved you to run the study that you want to run. So, sorry, that's a really long-winded answer. I don't know if Greer has anything to add there from the, from the regulatory perspective.
No, except that what a lot of people don't realise under the new regulations, certainly, I mean, it was always the case, but certainly under the new regulations, is that you actually need to get a lot of your technical documentation in place before you head into your clinical study or performance evaluation. So,
Yes.
So at the point where you would be thinking of applying your CE mark, that's when you really do know you're ready for your study. So there's a lot of work up front now, whereas I think in the past, a lot of companies just sort of, I don't know, almost retrofitted everything after the event, which wasn't quite how it should be.
Yeah, and I think, Jay, there's another point just to make here while we're talking on the subject of ethics committees. One of the fallouts from COVID is timelines with ethics boards and when they meet and how they can get you onto their documents in terms of review. So that's definitely a consideration. It's a consideration for location as well, for example. So, again, a CRO can help you understand and navigate that process. But one of the things I kind of want to say when you're talking about documentation, Greer, and about the need for that, we have had comments back from ethics and, of course, regulatory people on the most minute details in these documents that are provided, that you just are like, really? So if people think, well, why are we putting all these documents together? No one's ever going to read them. They do. They really do, and they scrutinize them. So, you have to go through that quality control process before all that documentation can be submitted. And I do want to say that, again, I think if we're talking about things that are evolving, that's evolved too. I think what people might have done, I don't want to say gotten away with in years past, because that's not fair either. Just things have changed and that's fine. But I do think it's a different playing field now in terms of that assessment and what's behind that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nicola. And Greer, are there any non-clinical regulatory requirements which need to be met before running a study?
Well, yes, I sort of briefly touched on the fact that you need your technical documentation in place. But in addition to that, I really want to emphasize the need for having a quality management system in place.
Yeah.
And it needs to be, ideally, it should be there right from the beginning. And it will grow and evolve with a company. So I know that the lowest risk devices and diagnostics, they tend not to go for full accreditation against 13485, which is fine. But I think the writing is on the wall that in future, that's the way to go, that you must have a 13485 accredited system. So that's something else to factor in when you're starting out down this journey. Or looking to launch a new product, etc. So your quality management system is not device or diagnostic specific. It is at the heart of the company. So you need to, you can't, there are lots of papers, documents out there that you can almost get a QMS off the shelf. And there are some very clever whizzy software solutions for a quality management system as well. But you can't just take it off the shelf and say, tick a box and say, I've done my quality management system. It has got to be bespoke to your company and it's got to be fit for purpose. So does it reflect what you actually do? It mustn't dictate to you. What it's doing is providing you with a structure to ensure that you're compliant with ISO 13485 and the IVDR, because there are quality requirements in the regulation as well. So you need to, reflect and look at those two areas. Having a quality management system as well actually makes a statement to your clients and the regulators that you are committed to to quality and providing good quality product. It's of high standard, it's safe, and that is another thing, safety. Having 13485 as accreditation can actually open doors to other markets. So if you're looking beyond Europe, you've got the US FDA. Okay, they've got their own quality requirements, but they are just going through this process where they will accept a lot of the 13485. So if you do 13485 in Europe, then you will have done a lot of work already for the US market. Places like Australia, they accept 13485. So don't limit your horizons necessarily to Europe. This can open doors to other areas. It does increase efficiency. It may be a bit painful to begin with to sort of work out how to create this bespoke system that will work with you. But it will be worth it. It will make you work more efficiently and effectively. And it's a really good way of controlling your supply chain. Diagnostics devices, they are invariably made up of many different components, and those components can come from anywhere in the world. So as a legal manufacturer, your quality management system is going to help you control that supply chain and identify the roles and responsibilities so that nothing slips through the cracks. It is, as I said, it is evidence. If you have the 13485 accreditation, it's evidence that you're producing devices that are to a high standard, and it's a very good way of making sure that you meet the requirements of the regulators, and you meet and exceed the expectations of your customers. So, that's something else that I really want to emphasize during this IVDR Celebration Week, is the importance of having a really robust quality management system. And it's not something that, in a virtual sense these days, doesn't sit on a shelf and gather dust. It's something that you continually revisit, and monitor, evaluate, and improve on. And it's very important for post-market surveillance as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, Greer, and especially from our perspective, and I come, originally from the drug industry, and, where those types of quality management systems were built into things like an electronic trial master file, for example, and these kinds of things are very applicable to running studies from a quality management perspective, because, an electronic trial master file system is a way to gather and to organize all of the information that you're collecting about your clinical study. And we started actually having conversations about the interface between that, your QMS, and then your what we call it the TMF, the trial master file. And those systems can go in and they can get audited, from a clinical point of view as well. So it's really, really important that you have everything filed, all the right versions are there, that there's an audit control, all of the above applies in the clinical world, and for your electronic data capture systems. Equally, if not more important, about those as quality management systems, because that's exactly what that is. These are specific clinical systems that are built to house data to comply with all regulations, particularly from a data and privacy point of view. Dare I say it's threat of GDPR, but it's here. And really, what is that about? It's about protecting information in general and housing it in a very secure way. So these are all considerations, when it comes to quality management of trials, particularly.
Okay. And while discussing, there was a lot of emphasis on documentation. So can I quickly ask you, what documentation is required for a clinical performance study?
A lot. So your most important, we call it a protocol. You can, they like SIPs in devices, but essentially it's the document, one of the most important documents that you pull together, that gathers everything that you need to document and summarize about how you're going to run a clinical study and rationale behind it. So we start off with that. So that, and actually there's so much information that then feeds into that document. So there are things like you need a data management plan. So that's, again, a document that outlines how you're going to collect all of your data. You need a supplies plan, and particularly given what Greer was saying before, it's absolutely critical that there's a process has been thought through. And that's really what I wanted to say about all these documents, right? They're not just documents. All they are is a representation of how you're going to run a study in the absolute best, most robust, way possible. Risk management plan, you need that. You also require, of course, your informed consent, any kind of documentation where you're dealing with patients. All of that will have to be supplied, and how you've thought through that, and how you've thought through data protection. If you have a safety management plan as and when needed. You need, ideally CVs of different participating institutions. So the list goes on. It's quite exhaustive, and again, there'll be some variation in those types of documents required. It used to be sometimes that when you were making a submission, you would put a lot of information on like a massive form, but generally it's not really how it works. You have to have these documents that are pulled together separately and added in as attachments. So there's a lot to consider, because you also, again, your statistical analysis plan, you have to justify to ethics and regulators why you have the number that you have chosen. And I think Greer and I have talked about this before, that you can't just pick a number of a study, for participants or samples or anything like that someone else has done or that somebody thinks is a good idea. And it happens. So there's quite a long laundry list, Jay, but and again, with the help of regulatory collaborators, it's something that we can certainly provide and let people know more about. But there's a lot, and again, it's not that they're documents; it's what they represent in terms of a process, in terms of a set of responsibilities, and who's going to do what, and that it represents the totality of everything you've thought through to be able to run your study safely and efficiently. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you so much, Nicola, for that input. And I had a question from one of the audiences the other day, which asks about how do you find the right sites for clinical studies or clinical requirements that needs to be fulfilled?
It's a really good question, a really important question. So what we tend to see is that a lot of companies start building relationships with various clinicians in different fields very, very early. And that's great, because a lot of times they're able to tap into some of those sites when it comes to running a study. But all we caution is that we call this general term is feasibility, and all that means is when you go to run your study, especially when you need multiple sites, of course you can look to run studies at a site where you've already got a really good relationship, but actually there's so much more to it and to that decision than that, because you're not running a study with just that clinician, you're running a study with an institution. So therefore that institution actually normally has to give its permission for that study to be run there. Then you have to pay that institution. And so, an example in the UK is the industry costing template, which is a really great tool. You can find it online. And what that does, it tells you how much that institution where you might want to run your study is going to cost you. So the process of feasibility is assessing all the reasons why you should run a study at a particular site or why you shouldn't. And it comes down to those things. It comes down to relationships. It comes down, it's something that CROs around the world do and help, clients to find the right sites. And the right site is the institution that has the bandwidth, has the ability to run your study. So the research support that your study will need, and also, of course, access to patient population or to the labs or whatever else that you need. So it's almost like a checklist that you can use to really assess those sites. And, most institutions around the world will be familiar with this, and there's a particular gateway to go through, usually through the R&D groups, for example, clinical research facilities in Ireland. They're the gatekeepers that can really help you to assess whether or not that institution can run your study. And, the one thing I do want to say about this is this idea, my KOL, this KOL, that KOL. So all I would say is that at the end of the day, you need a clinician and a group of people to run your study and get your evidence. And there are so many great institutions and places and settings. So we talked about decentralized trials in the past, and I just wanted to mention that there. When we talk about sites and feasibility, I have to bring that up because the decentralized model of running studies has changed so much about how you go about doing feasibility, because there's wonderful companies who do it too. But there's loads of companies out there offering that as a service where you can access a huge range of patients, particularly in the US, and it doesn't all have to be filtered through one big institution that's well known. So there's lots of different options. And funnily enough, those options were always there. But let's face it, the last 2 years have changed everything for all of us. And the ability to go out there and find great researchers, clinicians to help run a study is exponentially better, I think, than it was. So I hope that answers that question, Jay.
And can I just touch on what you were just saying there about the last couple of years? Because, the pandemic did just stop studies dead in their tracks.
Yeah.
Perhaps you could just talk through that a bit, and also, what changes have we kept? Because, we talk about, it's like auditing, the notified bodies, they don't mind doing virtual audits now, within reason, depending on the risk classification, et cetera. But is it the same with studies? Can you do that remotely?
You can, but all we caution is that it all depends. It depends on the study, it depends on the product, and it depends on the therapeutic area. But it's a very good question, Greer, because actually some of those changes that we saw, for better or for worse, but from a clinical trial point of view, for better, the fact that a patient can have a televisit, can have a consultation on a video call, and we've worked with partners as well that the home nursing. So instead of patients, obviously vulnerable patients coming in, actually there's organizations out there that are absolutely super and have teams of nurses, and they were able to keep conducting research because essentially what you were doing is bringing the site to the patient. Yeah. So, we've done some work understanding that and understanding where that's really applicable. And there's so much great stuff. The technology has enabled it, but so has the mindset. And I think that was something we really had to get to. And, that is absolutely, it's here to stay, Greer. It's not going anywhere. Where can we not have patients come in to an institution, and where can they have, we can gather data remotely. We have all of these, what we call e-consent. Again, it depends on the country, just want to clarify that. But e-pros, so what we mean by that as well is patients can record their own feedback, shall we say, electronically, and that gets uploaded into a system. They don't necessarily have to come in for a visit to their institution to do that. So this is absolutely these kinds of, I suppose, enablers. They are here to stay, and it's great. But all I would caution is that it's not necessarily applicable for every single type of study. You have to go through. You actually have to go through that feasibility assessment to see what you can do, decentralized, shall we say, versus really what you can't.
Yeah. And do you think it's being able to take the trial, as it were, the study to the patient? Do you think that's actually helped retain participants in studies? Because there was I know that a lot of, certainly on the pharmaceutical side, retention of participants was one of the key problems.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It absolutely has. One of the partners that we work with has got some absolutely really compelling figures about how much that made a difference to their retention rates in studies. So without a doubt, Greer, it has. Yeah. Oh, it is. It's definitely good because, like you said, the last few years have been very, very difficult. We had clients that had to stop studies, and it's been, I just want to also say and acknowledge that and the difficulties that they've faced. And really just what we're seeing now, just to make people aware, is that there's still some issues in terms of staffing at different sites where there's just not the bandwidth to support certain kinds of research unless it's incredibly high priority. So again, that process of going out and assessing where is the best place to run my study. I might have this relationship and I'm really keen for this clinician, but just to be open to the fact that A, you might need more sites, and B, unfortunately, that might not actually be the right institution. It might be the right clinician. There's nothing to change that, but it might not be the best site for you to run your study.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for this input. And when we talk about clinical performance, what will your responsibilities actually be?
You're responsible for everything. Yeah, because I was listening to some of the discussion earlier this week about, you know, the responsible person and all of that, and I think it's all tied into the same understanding that as a study sponsor, so if you're running a study, you are the study sponsor. People think, well, I'm delegating responsibility to you. Well, you kind of are and you kind of aren't. You're actually kind of not. You know, CROs will run the study and it's their responsibility to run that study in compliance with all of the regulations. But the responsibility is that it's your product and that never goes away. So no matter what happens, you know, the buck does stop at the sponsor. It really, really does. And I think be very careful about, you know, understanding that and, you know, again, Greer, I know has been mentioned before, a CRO can be your legal representative in a country. And of course, that comes with a whole set of responsibilities. Absolutely, it does. You know, I think safety reporting and those kinds of things were mentioned. Yes, there are responsibility as a CRO, but it's a shared responsibility because it's still the sponsor. So yeah, I think Greer, you know, what you've said before about that need for people to have that expertise in-house, you know, is absolutely critical. Or not in-house, I suppose what I mean is they have access to it, because I think, again, has been said, there's a lot of change, an important change in the level and depth of that responsibility. And I think for companies to understand that and to reach out to the right people that can help them is critical.
Thank you so much, Nicola. And Greer, what or I would say, which are the key roles within a company needed to support the clinical performance study?
Okay, so I'm going to work from outside Europe in, assuming that this is, you know, we are talking about EU IVD regulation here. So if it's a non-EU manufacturer and they're wanting to run a performance study in Europe, then Nicola's already alluded to the fact that, you know, they're certainly going to need an EU legal rep for clinical trials. And that can be the CRO that you appoint, or it could be a separate entity. I think the manufacturer needs to be very clear on the role that they want that representative. I mean, there's obviously legal responsibilities that go with that. But, you know, if it's going to be your CRO, then that relationship needs to be managed. And you need to definitely be working closely with your CRO. Don't just do a dump and run. You know, this is team effort. So the EU clinical trial legal rep, if that's your CRO, that's great. If it's a different entity, that's great. But you need to understand, are they going to be working with your CRO? Or, you know, as a sponsor, are you going to working directly with them, sort of almost like via the legal rep, which would be an unusual situation. The other thing is, if you don't have a presence in Europe, you're going to need an EU authorized representative under the new regulation. So you're going to need to appoint an entity to cover you off there to ensure compliance. I've already mentioned about your quality management system. I think one of the key people in your company, whether you're EU or outside EU, is your quality manager, and whoever has overall responsibility for quality. So, you know, it all stops with one person at the end of the day, but the quality side of it, very, very important. And again, they need to be working closely with the clinical team. And with your CRO. And then finally, the very critical one is this whole new role of person responsible for regulatory compliance. And if you are a micro or small company, according to the EU Commission definition, you are allowed to actually outsource that role. And it is to an individual. I mean, you can outsource to a consultancy, but in that consultancy, there will be individuals who you will be naming as your person responsible for regulatory compliance. And that individual needs to be continuously at the disposal of the company. So it is basically a 24/7 role. The difference between the PRRC, and I know I've covered this off in an earlier session, but the difference between the PRRC and the EU authorised representative is the PRRC is responsible for ensuring that ensuring that the company is compliant with the regulations, but they are not legally responsible for that. The EU authorised representative, however, is equally liable with the manufacturer, the legal manufacturer, for placing product onto the EU market, and that's a legal responsibility. The person responsible for regulatory compliance is all about ensuring compliance with the regulations, and they are absolutely key for the very start of your development process. You know, when you're at concept stage, going through development, you know, looking towards your studies, you need that PRRC right at the beginning, because they are making sure that you're generating the right data and you're complying with the correct standards and regulations. So they're your number one, PRRC.
Yes, thank you so much, Greer, for mentioning that. And before we move towards the final question for this session, there is some information for our audiences that today at 2 p.m. we will be live again, where we are going to talk about where to start in order to launch an IVD medical device onto the EU market. And in this session, we are going to interact with Stephen Griffin and with Greer Deal, and we are going to understand how to launch it within the European Union. And that session is going to be at 2 p.m. And before we move towards the closing of this session, the question for you, Nicola, would be, can you give 3 key takeaways for the EU IVD manufacturers, especially when clinical performance study is considered?
3? Okay.
Only 3.
The first thing is, you absolutely need to fully understand what your requirements are for your performance evaluation. So where are the gaps in what you have? What do you need? So your regulatory strategy is absolutely key for us to come in and help understand then what your trial design. I have to say, this is a drum I've been banging for a really long time, but the design of the right study is critical. It will tell you everything you will need to know about what you're going to do. And, again, I would say, so regulatory, your trial design, and just making sure that you're accessing the right people and the right kind of help. Because like we've said before, there's a lot of wonderful people out there that provide this expertise, and to talk to us, to talk to other people, and really make sure that you're accessing the right help. So.
Thank you so much, Nicola. And I will now pass the same question to Greer. Greer, what will be your 3 key takeaways for EU or for any IVD manufacturers?
You need your PRRC, your person responsible for regulatory compliance, whether that's internal employees or you're going to outsource it. And you can actually have a PRRC nominated for different groups of devices. You could group them by risk classification. So you can have several PRRCs, whether they're in-house or external. Your quality management system, absolutely the foundation of your business. Very, very important. Quality management system. And finally, remember that your performance evaluation report and your performance evaluation is mandatory. And if you don't have that PER available for your notified body to review, they won't continue the review. So it'll be a non-starter, and you'll just thrown a lot of money down the drain if you haven't got that available for your notified body.
Well, thank you so much for all these takeaways and all the insights that you and Nicola have given today to all our audiences. So again, to the viewers who are viewing this live or who would be viewing the recording, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to drop an email at mdd@mddltd.com, and our experts will be there to help you out with your queries related to in vitro diagnostic regulations. Once again, a big thank you to Greer and Nicola. And before we sum up this session, is there any closing comments from either of you?
Go on, Greer.
I was just going to reiterate what Nicola has said several times during this session, actually, is, you are not alone. There's a lot of expert advice out there, a lot of people really very willing and able to support the IVD sector. So don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't look at your studies and your regulatory as a cost. It really is an investment in your business and in your future success. So that's my last statement.
And I would just say is, in order to make sure you've got the right evidence and the right data, you need the right trial design, because let me tell you, the wrong trial is the most costly thing that you could do, because there are now more and more instances of trials being rejected because they were not executed properly. Not only were they not thought out properly, but they weren't executed properly. And it's a reality. So make sure you do the right thing.
And it's not just the cost of the trial that that hits your bottom line. Is the fact that it's delaying your time to market.
Absolutely.
So your competitors are streaking ahead of you. So try and get it as right as possible at the outset, and you have the competitive advantage.
Okay, thank you so much, Nicola and Greer, once again for taking time out of your busy schedules and enlightening our audiences and contributing towards IVDR Celebration Week. Again, for all our audiences, IVDR Celebration Week is brought to you by Medidia and powered by Global Regulatory Services in association with our resource partners, which includes Galway Chamber, Medelink Midlands, Afortiori Development, Xenon Health Solutions, GS1 Ireland, Health and Innovation Hub Ireland, Embassy of India, Dublin, Ireland. And together, all of us want you to be #IVDR ready. All right, that's it for today's session. See you again live today at 2 p.m. when we talk about launching your medical devices and in vitro diagnostic medical devices onto the EU market. Till then, stay tuned and be IVDR ready. Thank you once again for tuning in today.